Is there a single time in ancient history when life as we know it started to take shape? Well, of course. Life as we know it popped up in Asia Minor around the 4th and 5th millennia BCE, in the land between the rivers Tigris and Euphrates, known as Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers. The Ubaid culture started to lay the foundation of the first cities. Between the 10th and 4th millennia BCE, people transitioned from a hunter-gatherer lifestyle to an agricultural one. Following a few successive migrations into Mesopotamia from the north, the south, and the east, the Sumerian culture started to take form. With an influx of people, the population started rising, and the first major cities in human history appeared on the globe. What was it like in that land far away, where humanity took its first steps towards civilization? Mesopotamia, often known as the cradle of civilization, gave the world its first city-states, its first democracy, and its first autocracy. It pioneered writing, schooling, organized religion, lawmaking, art, and literature. To understand how all this came about, let's take a look at the people of ancient Sumer. During the Bronze Age, the ancient Sumerians were hunter-gatherers based around the ancient Sumer, modern-day Iraq and Kuwait. These were inventive and imaginative people, and one may find them quite similar to modern societies, complete with their ills and ambitions. Some studies show that the plausible birthplaces of the Sumerian ancestors might have been in modern-day Turkmenistan. The Sumerian chronology starts with the Ubaid culture, whose roots can be traced to a small settlement, Tel al-Ubaid, near the ancient city of Ur. The Ubaid period charts the time from 6500 BCE to 4100 BCE. Around 5400 BCE, the Sumerian people founded the city of Eridu, one of the oldest Sumerian settlements, based on available data. 4 centuries later, the Sumerians started settling at Godin Tepe. Around this time, archaeologists find the earliest signs of burials. In about the 4th millennium BCE, the city of Uruk was founded. Here they built their first temple, marking the beginning of the Uruk period. The Uruk period lasted from 4100 to 2900 BCE, during which writing was in full swing in the city. Estimates place the invention of writing around 3600 BCE, and the writing of the first religious texts a century later. By 3200 BCE, scribes were more common in ancient Sumer. The Uruk period saw Uruk develop as a magnificent city. According to archaeologists, it became the world's first metropolis, and it hosted around 80,000 people at its peak. The early dynastic period, spanning from 2900 to 2334 BCE, follows the Uruk period. During this period, we find royal graves in the grand city of Ur. King Eannatum ruled over the city of Lagash around 2500 BCE, forming the first dynasty of the city as well as the earliest record of an empire in Sumer. In this period, non-religious literature, like myths and poetry, became increasingly common in and around Lagash. In 2334 BCE, Sargon of Akkad took over most of the Sumerian lands and formed the first multi-ethnic, expansive empire in the Middle East. His rule lasted until 2279 BCE, at which point the nomadic Gutians started taking over the Sumerian lands. Thus began the Gutian period. A little around half a century after the Gutian conquest, the first tablets of the Epic of Gilgamesh were written. After the consequent rule of Utu-Hagal, Ur-Nammu gave birth to the third dynasty of Ur, an era that brought about many significant changes known as the Sumerian Renaissance. In 2038 BCE, King Shulgi built the so-called Great Wall of Uruk. The third dynasty of Ur ended around 1940 BCE. The last Sumerian, or rather Akkadian, dynasty to rule over the vast empire was the dynasty of Isin. The empire fell around 1750 BCE due to the invasion of the Elamites, bringing the Sumerian civilization to an end. The ancient Sumerians have been lost to time, like most great civilizations of the past, but their influence continues to bleed into modern times. For the longest time, scholars used to think that the ancient Sumerians were an autocratic, authoritarian society, not unlike the ancient cultures of Egypt, China, and Babylon. However, this was not the case, as we now know. The ancient Sumerians enjoyed their fair share of democracy, even if not for the entirety of their existence. Most governmental positions were elected, and a council made the necessary decisions regarding state matters. The need for a single ruler arose when the warfare between the city-states became increasingly common, as well as clashes with the barbaric tribes to the east and the west. The Ensi, a city-state ruler, acted merely as a governor in the early days. He was elected and used to represent the city's patron god. Ensi also acted as the head priest of the temple and belonged to the patron god of the city. Each temple used to have two chief administrators, namely the En and the Sangha. The En handled the priestly and divine duties and acted as a supervisor for the priests and priestesses of the temple, while the Sangha acted as the business end of the temple's affairs. The priests in ancient Sumer were part of the nobility. Due to their higher status, they were more educated and enjoyed a much better lifestyle than their contemporary citizens did. One had to come from a noble family and pass some grueling training to become a priest. Before the Ensi assumed control as the supreme ruler of their respective city-states, a bicameral assembly consisting of lower and upper houses deliberated to conclude important matters of the state. The upper house consisted of nobility and priestly classes, whereas the lower house consisted of commoners. The socio-economic structure of the Sumerians could be divided into four classes. The Ensi, his spouse, the priests, the local princes, and men of great repute occupied the highest strata. These people owned most of the land and made up most of the upper house of the city assembly. The second group was the commoners, who owned land collectively as members of a family. The third group consisted of the so-called clients, who in turn consisted of three subgroups: the well-to-do temple dependents, the temple personnel, and the dependents of nobles. The first two subgroups used to possess small patches of temple land, though not permanently. The last subgroup was probably compensated as seen fit by their aristocratic employers. The fourth class or group in the Sumerian society was comprised of slaves. Like most ancient cultures, the Sumerians were familiar with and relied on slavery. However, it was not as barbaric as in some civilizations that followed them. The slaves did strenuous work, retained some legal rights, and they could trade with commoners and merchants. They could even borrow money to buy their freedom. That is not to say that they did not receive severe punishments and were not treated unfairly by their owners. Healthy slaves would sell for less money than a donkey. Just as a slave could work his way out of slavery, free citizens who failed to pay their debts or who broke a strict law could become slaves. Men were the major demographic when it came to slaves. Women and children slaves were not valued highly because almost all slave labor was physical labor for which males were preferred. Men in Sumer lived a better life and had more rights, but women also enjoyed several rights. Women had the right to hold property and conduct business. They were considered equal to men in terms of legal witnesses, which was quite the opposite to the Islamic culture that came to dominate this region a couple of millennia later, where multiple women had to serve in a single man's stead. Despite being somewhat progressive, women were not equal to men by any stretch of the imagination. For instance, they could have a high post in the temples, but they could not attain the designation of Ensi. When it came to children, the Sumerians treated them like adults. Just as the law legally bound all adult men and women, the children were also bound. There was no exemption for being a minor. Just as adults could be sold off, bought, and freed from slavery, so could children. If either one of the parents of a newborn baby was a free citizen, the baby was declared free. However, a child born to two slaves grew up in slavery. Parents could raise or disown their children, a practice that made adoption a commonplace phenomenon. The children of Sumer would have grown up in a mythologized and deeply religious world. It is important to note that the Sumerian mix of myths and legends corresponds to several world myths, deities, creation theories, and pantheons of subsequent religions and cultures of the area. The Sumerians believed that the world is a closed dome surrounded by a primordial saltwater sea. Beneath the ground lay a freshwater ocean that was the source of all visible water. Their gods were many, full of follies and virtues. They looked nothing like the puritanical Abrahamic god. Their pantheons were similar to the other polytheistic religions of yore, where contradictions and interpretations found their rightful place. Even though the Sumerians worshipped many gods and goddesses, 7 major deities stood head and shoulders above the rest. The other gods were minor gods, and like the minor ones, the major ones were not immune from harm. The culture passed the habit of personifying deities onto other Near Eastern and Mediterranean religions in the future. The Sumerians visited their temples and performed appropriate rituals in their free time to appease their gods. When it came to working, jobs and professions varied for different classes. The upper-class Sumerians could become priests, scribes, royal members, or minor noblemen. Since the higher classes received better education and had access to better social facilities, they were usually better at writing, speaking, and singing. It comes as no surprise that the first people to practice medicine belonged to the priestly class. Being a priest was the most highly valued profession, but as cuneiform writing became popular, scribes also garnered reputation and fame. As for the commoners, they formed the backbone of the Sumerian society. It is quite probable that the Sumerians were a primarily agricultural society. They invented many soil-working tools and dedicated gods to harvest and fertility. Food was mostly attained by agriculture, but it was not the only source. Herding cattle, raising fowl, hunting, and fishing were all regular professions for the common man. The closest counterpart of noble scribes in the lower classes were the artisans: the sculptors, the jewelers, lapidaries, carpenters, smiths, leatherworkers, fullers, basket makers, and builders. Nevertheless, ambitious parents did not want their children to be farmers or craftsmen, and often tried to make them pursue academic or theological professions. Art was also important to the Sumerian lifestyle, as music, literature, and sculptures represented religious as well as secular beliefs. Logically, a culture that invented writing was eventually going to use it for both aesthetic and practical purposes. Given their expansive pantheon, one might be tempted to believe that the Sumerians were highly religious, but one must keep in mind that their societies had many secular institutions, like the Sumerian school or ebook. Here, children were taught practical skills, including scholarly skills like writing, mathematics, grammar, and literary and creative matters. The great innovators are also credited with perfecting the use of the wheel. Thinking of the people of ancient Sumer as just another ancient civilization is reductive. These were highly creative and wildly innovative people who paved the way for all major civilizations of the planet. Living in the era of the ancient Sumerians, one must have witnessed people struggling to survive and progress, just as one sees today. However, in retrospect, they serve as the wedge between times when survival was the highest pedigree of human life to one where progress is. To learn more about what it was like to live in ancient Sumer, check out our book, Sumerians, a captivating guide to ancient Sumerian history, Sumerian mythology, in the Mesopotamian Empire of the Sumer civilization. It's available as an ebook, paperback, and audiobook. Also, grab your free Mythology bundle ebook while they're still available. All links are in the description. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button and subscribe for more videos like this.